So that leads me to part 2, where I'd like you to participate. Okay? So let's jointly try and figure out that if this is the kind of situation that has led to it, and is the kind of situation that prevails, and you have your own independent uh, data and information and views on what's happening in the world and the world of oil, what should USA's strategy be? Let's figure out what USA should do next. Just as it's an exercise in strategy. And let me share with you 2 important things that I've learned in my career as a strategy consultant, even at the risk of telling you what you already know. Number 1, as a strategy consultant, I've succeeded on all my engagements once I started following a different track from what is written in the business books and what is taught in business schools. They teach many good things, including the all-important SWOT analysis, which helps us understand whether there's an opportunity which is worth our while, what our strengths are vis-a-vis the opponents, and to go for the opponent's weaknesses so that we can win. Okay? But I have always advised my clients to ignore the weaknesses. Why? Because if the opponent is winning, in spite of his weaknesses, how will destroying that weakness going to make any difference? You're going to attack the strength. So strategically, the thing to do is analyze the strength of the opponent and look what are the weak points in the strength of the opponent. Knock that down and the whole strength gets dismantled. So the whole idea is to identify the weakness in the strength of an opponent and dismantle that. So that's lesson number 1 I've learned. Number 2, there are only 2 reasons where people buy anything, whether it's a product or a service. And that's what I tell my young colleagues who come in, who are recruited. And after their training in sales and marketing and all that, I'm supposed to give a 15-minute talk. And I tell them, look, all that you learned is fine. There are only 2 reasons why people buy your argument or your idea or your product or your services, either fear or hope. Why does a person buy Fair and Lovely cream? It's hope. Why does anyone buy a fire insurance or burglary? It's fear. Life insurance, medical insurance, fear. Because today a surgery can put you back quite badly. Why does anyone join a gym? Hope. So if you think about seriously, everything is about hope and fear. So if you can deal with these 2 things, understanding how to dismantle the strength or weakness by identifying the weakness in the strength, and understanding whether the other side is going to buy fear or hope, you can manage a lot of things. So the situation is that US wants to tilt the balance in its favor after always enjoying the benefit. It was sitting on top of a unipolar world for nearly 2 decades. That mojo is waning all over the emerging multipolar market. So it wants to tilt the balance in its own favor, whether Saudi Arabia or wherever. It wants to regain its hold on the OPEC through Saudi Arabia, which accounts for 60% of the GDP of GCC. I'm coming to questions to you. It's okay for Russia if the war chest is down to the dredges. UK will have a bit of leverage over Russia. USA will have a bit of a leverage over Russia if that happens. I have no idea how it will be handled if Trump returns and gets Russia out of war. The last point I want to make is it's also instructive to understand how USA managed to dominate the world from 1940s. Let's go 80 years back to the Bretton Woods Agreement, when the US persuaded its allies that the US dollar should be the currency for the global trade, and not the pound sterling. So in 1994, the badly bruised UK and Europe agreed to that while the war is still going on. And US in turn not only said that they'll give them money, but brought in additional arms and troops. So they were promised that after the war is over, US will spend billions of dollars on reconstructing Europe all the countries, Germany, UK, France, Netherlands, and the Marshall Plan took 4 years to materialize, but they actually spent the billions, and the whole of Europe was reborn thanks to USA. But it also meant USA got huge amount of leverage and became the global power. Russia was also offered a part of this to be part of the Marshall Plan, but Russia, being Russia at that time, they were very suspicious. They said, no, we don't want to have anything to it, which is how it became a multipolar world. Then USSR went down and became a unipolar world. So this is the world we are in, and the US hegemony is on the wane. Don't expect the US to sit quiet and let things slide. So if you are in the US and you have a say, you cannot let Saudi Arabia slip out of orbit. So what should it do? Over to you.
Okay, Raj, I have a few things I'd like to say. Actually, I thought you'd have started from the Bretton Woods system itself, because that's how the entire background would have made sense, so that people would understand the Bretton Woods system of 1944, when the people, 720 people met the United Nations, 44 countries, and all the allied nations, and it was at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire in the US. That's why it's called that way. And then the International Monetary Fund was formed. And the US were very smart at that time, because they pegged the US dollar against $35 a troy ounce of gold. And they made sure that every nation's official currency exchange would be tied with the US dollar. And then based on that, the IMF was formed. And then you fast forward to the Yom Kippur War of 1973, when the Arab nations, Egypt and Syria, actually attacked Israel. And then General Moshe Dayan, the one-eyed bandit, crushed them totally. And the US actually supported Israel, which actually got their goat. And the OPEC countries, the seven sisters, actually decided to raise the price of oil. And but then King Faisal of Saudi Arabia was the person who had this deal with Nixon and Kissinger on the 6th of June, 1974. And that was essentially an economic cooperation. It had got nothing to do with the war. So just look at the Yom Kippur War and the Arab nations against Israel and against the ally of Israel. And yet King Faisal, Saudi Arabia, the second largest producer of oil, the first, of course, is the US. And incidentally, the US does not need anybody's oil, because, in fact, they produce 18.4 million barrels of oil per day and actually consumes $18.12 million. But they still import because of the chemistry and the sweetness and the weight and all that, which is chemical engineers would know why that is so. But the lifting costs in some countries is much lower, and that's the reason why economic sense. But the US also has a lot of reserves, and which they can call upon, which they did during the Libyan war, which they did during the Ukraine war, and so on. And in fact, when I read about this thing about the petrodollar and the people jumping to saying that, hey, the dollar is finished, actually, if you look at the UBS report by Paul Donovan, I'm sure you would have read it, and he also says that it's the crypto guys who actually, they actually want the demise of the dollar, not anybody else. The US can just sit pretty, in my opinion. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because in terms of oil, Saudi sends, I have figures, Saudi exports $56 billion of oil to in Chinese yuan, 34, in case they sell it in their prices, $34 billion in Japanese yen, $33 billion in Indian rupees, $32 billion in Korean won, and just $16.6 billion to the US. Now, look at the imports that Saudi does from these countries. Now, in case they trade in yuan, Saudi imports from China $30 billion, from Japan $4 billion, from India $7 billion, from Korea $5.5 billion. So what will they do with all those yuan then? It'll be junk. And in fact, they will have to actually exchange all there's yuan and yen and won and the South Korea and the Indian currency, and they'd have the currency risk also.
Exactly.
And the US actually, from what I learned from various friends of mine in the US, they are they're more concerned about the reserves, and it's about how much reserves. It's not about transactions that they're worried about. So it's about it's about keeping dollars. So even if transactions or denominations are it goes. So their reserve status is not about how money is not about how money is spent, but how money is stored. And you would know better than others that the US bonds are the cheapest, and everybody parks their funds in the US.
And
So
the US economy is benefiting.
exactly. So the US is perennially in debt because they run on debt. I mean, whatever Ben Bernanke may do, I mean, he keeps changing the Fed rates. But then if you look at the rates, the US is benefiting and they will continue to be in debt. And yet people will park their funds in US dollars only. Now for Saudi Arabia, and if I think you know too, and all of us probably may know, that the Saudi riyal is pegged to the US dollar.
3.75.
Exactly, it's pegged to it. So if it is pegged to it, all its reserves, all its financial assets are in US dollars. So it doesn't make sense for them. Well, it might help other countries, but actually it will not help Saudi Arabia to get the Indian, to get yuan in exchange for the oil that they sell to China or to Japan or to India or to Korea, and get Indian rupees for that, because Indian exports to Saudi Arabia is only $7 billion. So what do they do with $25 billion of Indian rupees? They would have to convert it. And as you know, in currency risk, and since you've traveled a lot and we too have, if you remember in the years when we had the Deutschmark, the Italian lira, and the French franc, and so on, if we were in Europe and traveling from one country to another, it was a headache to actually convert and lose money if I'm converting Deutschmark to French franc and French franc to lira. Every time it would happen, it'd go. And thank God they decided to do the euro in 1999 after they formed the EU. So actually, I'm not very sure that this trading in Indian in local currency is actually going to help Saudi Arabia, because for them, it's about reserves, and they've got a huge. In fact, the 1974 deal was done. It was an economic cooperation, right? There was no formal agreement. It was done only as to how will I park all my money, and the US was the best place to park their money. And Saudi needs the US because it has to counter Iran, which is their greatest enemy. And they need the military equipment from the US, and they pay the US in US dollars. And in fact, in terms of balance of payments, there's only $16 billion that the US buys from Saudi. The rest of it, in fact, the US buys more oil from Canada. 51% is bought from Canada. In fact, the US imports from 71 countries. And as far as Saudi is concerned, it's only about 250,000 or so. That's all. Peanuts, actually.
Yeah.
So the US is sitting pretty with lots of reserve, and it can go to just about anybody as far as they care. The Saudi has to be very careful, and as you know, in financial systems, one has to be very careful with respect to the
My question is, what should the US do? You're US.
Yes.
What would you do to get Saudis back in line and not act tough with you?
Well, I have not seen the US dollar devaluing in the last 50 years. Okay, so the crypto people think, the Chinese people think that the dollar will suffer a demise, but you know and I know that the US dollar has only gone on increasing.
Let's leave the dollar aside.
Yeah.
Let's leave the dollar value aside.
Yeah.
Strategically, what should USA do, not to save the US dollar, but what should they do to get Saudis back on track?
Actually, Saudi
Saudis and their little finger, not anymore.
Yeah.
That is not
Saudi,
possible.
Saudi needn't do anything. I'm sorry, the US needn't do anything at all, in my opinion.
Okay.
Because they are actually sitting pretty with exporting military equipment and all the other things to Europe. Saudi Aramco is actually what? Arab American oil company, right? I mean, there's a US stake in Aramco and a sizable stake in that.
So what are other people's views? The views of other participants?
I
On
think
what
the
should
Saudis.
USA
I think the Saudis have already moved away from the US. They are no longer the exclusive domain of the US.
So
They
what
are
should
trying-
USA do? What should USA do?
I don't think there is anything they can do about it. It's just
Really?
the way it is. The US won't go, jump through hoops to get Saudis back. They'll let the chips fall where they may.
Okay. Anybody else?
No, I had some question about the Bretton Woods agreement, but it's already been answered by Rajaram asking this question.
Yeah.
But was not the US dollar linked to the gold standard
Yes.
at one time?
Yes,
And-
it was.
and what went wrong? Why did
See, they needed much more money than they actually had. So in Nixon's time, they knocked out this gold standard,
Mhm.
and it was no more connected with gold.
Okay.
So that was in 71.
1971.
Yeah, 71,
When-
it
yeah,
became
exactly.
a fiat currency.
The year
Yeah,
It was no longer connected to gold. The US now is a fiat currency.
So it can just produce any amount. They can print.
Yeah. It's not, you don't have to have Fort Knox to, have that much reserves of gold.
Correct. Not anymore.
Yeah.
So anybody else is the general agreement that USA need not do anything? Then why is Biden bending backwards to get this agreement signed now?
Raj, I don't know whether you can hear me. I don't know that general statement will be equally valid in both a second Biden administration and a second Trump administration.
There is no second Biden administration. There isn't any. I don't think Biden is going to last the month, if not the week.
Okay. Let me say the second Democrat administration versus a second GOP administration. I think that there is a difference because Trump does have a personal stake and deal in Saudi Arabia. I think the scenarios will be different between the two, and maybe Biden is aware of that, and that is why he's trying to get this thing through during his administration.
Are you talking about financial stake or some buildings and property, you mean?
I'm talking about a personal,
Yes,
this is
yeah.
my belief that Trump is interested more than the USA. Trump is interested in Trump.
Oh,
And
that is
so-
true. That is known, yes.
So that is my point, that a Trump administration will do what is good for Trump. That will happen in the Ukraine thing, that will happen in the Saudi thing. So what I'm trying to say is that it may be that Trump will have a much better relationship, and therefore there is going to be some horse trading between the USA and Saudi Arabia in a second Trump administration.
That is true.
I don't think the two
Probably.
scenarios are the same. That's all I was saying.
Right.
See that
What about
Khashoggi
Pradeep
thing-
and everybody else?
See that Khashoggi thing hurt the US, The stand they took with Khashoggi against Saudi Arabia, that hurt them quite a bit. And maybe Trump can recover from that. But in all probability, it looks like Trump is going to have a second term from the way situation is in the US.
Yes. That's the most probable scenario. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But we've seen, Shreya Borkar, that, over 50 years, Republicans and Democrats, nothing has affected the relationship between the US and Saudi. Nothing.
Well,
Am I audible?
No.
Yeah,
Sorry,
am I audible?
the Adnan Khashoggi thing did affect the relationship quite a bit.
Yes.
And Saudis are trying to move away from the US slowly, but they're trying to move away.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, you are.
Anyway,
Can
can
I-
I ask a question, Raj? You talked about the decrease in petrodollar is not going to affect the world economy as such. That means the preponderance of the US dollar and its majesty among other currencies will be retained.
See, the thing is that the world is so intricately linked with the US dollar that it is not going to, not something that will happen in the next 10 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you look at the amount of exports from
Whatever Paul
Saudi Arabia,
Walker said 10 years ago.
exports from Saudi Arabia to US or any other country, it's still largely in dollars. And Saudi Arabia is not going to say we will not sell you in dollars to Germany or anybody else, because for the simple reason that if their currency is pegged to the US dollar, there's no exchange risk at all. But if they start buying euros and they have to store euros somewhere, there'll be exchange risk. They'll have to take exchange cover. All that is expensive.
Yeah.
So if 70, 80, 90% of their oil trade still continues in dollars, then this pact not existing today won't make much of a difference.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the thing is that USA has lost a bit of its hold over Saudi politics, and it's through politics that they control trade and everything, including military hardware. So they have to get back. That is why my question to you: what should USA do? Can we just switch side to and say, if you were Saudi Arabia, what will you do? For instance, just put on a few points. Yeah, Satish, go ahead.
Can I put in a word?
Yes, please. Many words.
Well, I think we are doing a 15th floor building design where the lower floors are not really concerned. And that's kind of hard. All these countries are democratic countries. And in these democratic countries, we have got a system which is ancient. We are talking about AI, but the same kind of progress has been made in communications. And it is possible today for people to decide rather than politicians who get elected for 5 years or 4 years to take on the decision. Why are we not bringing this into the picture?
Would
If you
anybody
bring
like
this
to
into
respond?
picture, if you bring this into picture, a lot of things will change.
Yeah,
You will
I don't
not-
want to dominate the discussion. So will someone else want to respond to that?
I don't see, Satish, I mean, pardon me if it's just my argument as to, I didn't understand the 15 floor concept, and, you're saying that we are talking from a very large, very much high up there, whereas the ground reality is different. Actually, the ground reality is that there are forces like the yuan and the cryptocurrency desperately want the US to die, the dollar to die, and it won't die. Everybody parks his money in the US. If you go to Cambodia, the currency that's used is the US dollar. You go to Tanzania, the currency used is the US dollar. So everywhere the US will continue to remain strong. So the US can just sit pretty. Now, with respect to the with respect to the other countries who may want to trade. What would China do with the rest? What did the Saudi do with the rest of the Chinese yuan? Can you please tell me? It can't go on importing from China. It imports only 32 million, and there's a trade deficit of $18 billion. What will they do with that money? You please tell me. $56 billion of oil they buy from Saudi Arabia, $30 billion of Chinese goods they buy. Okay, they trade in yuan. What about $26 billion worth of Chinese yuan? It'll be like the ruble. If CD, you remember 1991, when we had a Russia office in Thermax, the ruble would be like a piece of paper flying in the air. It was of no use at all.
Okay. So very interesting discussion so far on what the US should do. Now, can we move to what the Saudis would do so that we get a little time to the part three?
Yeah.
See, I'll just put down some facts about where Saudi is, and then let's discuss. Saudi Arabia is rich now. Both Saudis and US know that Saudis will have over 450 billion in reserve, $450 billion. A large part of it is parked in the US Fed. Second, Saudis cannot afford to let the US slip and wipe out their own wealth. Third, the Saudi riyal is also pegged to the US dollar, as we explained. So if it drops, its own buying power falls. Fourth, USA, Russia, China, BRIC countries are courting Saudi Arabia right now. Oil will run out sooner or later. And all the world powers want them in their fold right now. So it's a very interesting position. Fifth, the royal family needs protection for themselves and their wealth. There's a thin line between the state and the ruling family. And they also know the history of the 20th century when most of the coups, or a very large percentage of coups around the world, were engineered by the US.
Yes.
So they said, if you want to catch a thief, hire a thief. No? So if USA says, we will see that there's no coup against you, but you just listen to what I want you to do. So they feel safe. There's a hope that they can continue for a long time.
And one more thing, Raj, the US and Saudi have a common enemy, Iran.
Yeah, correct. Then USA is okay with a little decline in the share of US denominated petro sales because the decline is more than compensated by rising Saudi purchases of AI products, chips. They spend on Amazon, they spend on FP. It's increasing rapidly. It's also just that the BRIC countries like China and even India might have some adverse trade deficit with KSA or the other way around. But they will strike some bilateral deals. It doesn't make much difference to USA. So the US strategists must understand one thing clearly: the Saudis want to remain dominant nation in the Middle East, and it's a big prestige issue. So if this is the situation, what should Saudi Arabia do to make sure that US courts it and it remains in the US orbit and gets maximum out of that? Over to you. So if you're MBS, what would you do? So you can't play with the US dollar without burning your own fingers. Therefore, what?
Well, just like the US made sure that every country would peg its currency to within 1% of parity, if Saudi can peg its currency with China, with Japan, the 5 large countries who are importing the oil, to 1% parity, then its currency risk is much lower. If they can do that. Now, why does it make sense for India or China or Japan or Korea to accept this? Because then the Korean won can be used to pay for the oil. And this is exactly what happened in the Bretton Woods Agreement, which is 1% of parity. So if you have 1%, that's not a great foreign exchange risk at all.
Yeah.
So if that's one way Saudi can do, and then they can use the balance of the yuan to buy US dollars, which is what they will do, and then park the funds in the US.
Yes. And in the process, if US dollar strengthens, it's good for them.
Yeah, of course.
Right? So as Beirut said a little while ago, if Trump comes back, and it's very likely, and even if we in this group can say that Trump is likely to come, obviously Saudi Arabia has got a better feel whether Trump will come. And if Trump comes, he's going to strike a deal with Saudi Arabia.
Can I ask a naive question? I didn't understand what Rajaram said when he said that, look, this 1% parity, what exactly does it mean?
The rates.
Just explain it to me, if you can, very short.
Will you do that? Or do you want me to?
You explain it.
No, you do that. I mean, you know finance much better. 1% parity means that, you know how foreign exchange is, isn't it? I mean, the currency change, well, Raj, why did you explain LIBOR and all the others so that you would know? Come on,
No,
Pradeep.
I understand
Let's go
LIBOR and all
LIBOR.
that, but I didn't
Okay.
understand exactly what this 1% parity means. Does it mean, if I have understood you correctly, that the difference between the buying and selling rate will be under 1%?
In terms
Up
of
to a point at
dollars.
that time, whatever the currency rates would fluctuate.
Ah.
Obviously, the US dollar would go up
Yes,
or come down depending
yes,
upon economy of the world. Similarly,
yes,
the yuan would go up and down, but
yes.
then there wouldn't be so much of a currency change. And even if China says that, okay, it now makes sense to get more products from Europe than from the US, Saudi would still be,
Uh-huh.
they would still have that particular agreement with them. And this would not be an unwritten thing now. It was unwritten from 1974 for Saudi and the US.
Yes.
Because the US didn't need any written agreement.
Mhm.
But now, if the US has to protect itself and not allow the dollar to come down, it will need that parity. Saudi will also need that parity because otherwise they will lose a lot of money. They would get, let's say, $7 billion of Indian rupees. In Indian rupees, as you know, the Indian rupee has been going from 80 to 83. It can go to 85, 87.
yeah,
What
yeah.
does it do to Saudi Arabia then?
Yeah.
Then it would have to spend more of that Indian rupees that they've got from India for the oil to buy dollars.
Right.
So they will actually lose money.
Okay,
So
so
if-
what you're saying is that the exchange rate between the two countries is pegged within a very, very narrow range.
Exactly.
that you
Raj,
would-
could you correct me?
Okay,
Say
so I want to just use the time for moving on to the next point.
Sure.
Like talking about fear. See, did the Arab Spring happen just by itself, or was it instigated? I suspect it was instigated so that all the Arab countries have a fear that this can happen in my country. So let me see that none of that happens. So today, if USA wants to, if Saudi Arabia knows that if USA wants to, it can just depose the Jordanian king. It'll make Israel happy, it'll make Iran unhappy, and it'll make the Arab kings and chiefs shit bricks. Because if this spreads into their countries, they're gone. So if that's the case, if they act tough with the USA, this can happen. They won't do it in an Arab country, which is very close to the center. It'll be just close to Israel. It'll make Israel also happy. So they can easily depose the guy there or the Syrian chief, work out a nice coup, and everybody's happy. And the chiefs of all these Arab countries will be scared. So for Saudi Arabia, it makes a lot of sense to be open to negotiating and be smart enough to get a little bit more, but not a lot more. If they're avaricious, they're going to lose because USA will play its cards. And if they can hang on till Trump comes, it's a guarantee that something will happen. But with Trump, it's a crazy bargain. He might thump the table and say, I want this, and you'll have to give it. Behruz, your view on that?
I think let's look at what happened between 1916 and 2020. 2016 and 2020, when Trump was in power. Was there anything very lopsided that happened, or was there a yo-yo or something between America and Saudi?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Yes, there was. I'll tell you, I was there in Jerusalem on the day Trump decided that the capital, the embassy of the US.
Yes, moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
From Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Yes.
Saudis were pissed. The whole Arab world was pissed. And it had its train. And Trump said, too bad. I don't care. Trump also said, I believe in the one nation theory and not the two nation theory. Whereas the world had come to accept two nations. And we had to figure out how to give Palestinians their autonomy and so on and so forth. Trump said, forget it, I don't want. So there are some hardline positions Trump can take, but he definitely will want to negotiate something and do something. So it's a very tricky situation. Should they agree to something before Trump comes or wait for Trump? It's a big question. And I don't think any of us can find the answers.
Raj, I have one question. I've
nothing
not
is gonna
understood the
happen.
crypto dominance.
Beirut,
You know,
Yeah.
nothing is going to happen before the elections.
nothing
There
will
is
happen.
not-
Okay.
There is not going to be any major decision made before the elections. I can guarantee you that.
Okay.
Raj, can you tell me something about the crypto thing? Because I haven't understood
Yeah.
crypto and blockchain with
So
respect to the.
can we keep crypto to the last?
Okay,
I want to
alright.
move to the third part, which is the entrepreneur.